Welcome back, everybody, to the Secret Cities podcast. We are reading chapter 16 to 20 in 19, and the chapter is called Love Me or Not. Now, on September 15th, 2027, it was 4 a.m., and Emily was drying her hair and getting ready for a busy day of party preparations. She and her husband Chad were going to go to a couple of appointments and then a slumber party that night that she was hosting for her friends Sunny and River, who were going to be 2 years older than her today. She was wearing light pastel purple and he was wearing light pastel green. She was in the bathroom getting ready and Chad was in the kitchen when she looked over on the bathroom counter for a pregnancy test. She looked up at it and saw that it was negative. She then threw it in the bathroom trash can. Her face saddened as she walked over to her jewelry box and picked up a little square-shaped locket. She picked it up and opened it to reveal two little... She then looked up and said, "Lord, please say happy birthday to my twins for me." She had a miscarriage 1 year ago today. She then put the locket around her neck, held on, took a deep breath, and said, "Okay, I got some other twins that need my help today. I can't get distracted." After that, she reached for her clipboard, which she was using to organize the day. She walked into the kitchen, where she was greeted by her husband, Chad, who was putting boxes on the dining room table. He asked, "How did it go?" Emily says, "Nothing. It was nothing." Chad then takes out his locket and opens it to see the same pictures Emily has in hers, and he then says they're probably up there dancing, and all we can do is miss them. "Yeah, they're up there. Anyways, we have everything we need. Let's go put it in the car." They quickly put everything in their very small car and drove away to go to the doctor's appointment that was to get some information about why she had a miscarriage. Test results came back to see that she had an inherited heart disorder called thrombophilia, and that she would have to take heparin shots to ensure the safety of her pregnancy. Finally, it was like Christmas Day to them. Everything that they'd ever wanted was within their reach. They left the hospital, and with excitement, Chad, who is an extrovert to the max, told everyone he walked by that he could be a father now. He was saying this to someone in the parking lot. He interrupted and said, "Chad!" in a very loud, concerned voice, and pulled him out of the middle of the street before he got hit by a fast-approaching car that was there for an emergency visit. Chad said, "Thanks, Emily." The sun was slightly coming up, just enough so that it looked like everything was slightly lit, but everything was still dim. Emily opened the door, and then she sat down, shutting the door behind her. And then she buckled up. And Chad, who was in the driver's seat, started the car, and they drove off. Later, they arrived at their destination, and they drove behind an orphanage into the parking space for volunteers. Chad looked over at Emily, who was drawing on her notepad. She was drawing flowers. Chad knew this was a sign that she was nervous because it was her first time back since she got banned from the orphanage. Chad said, "Okay." Emily said, "Let's just go." She opened her car door and got out. Then she went inside the funniest orphanage ever. She went into the office of the head caretaker, Miss Legend, who was a blonde-haired, well-maintained 50-year-old lady with piercing blue eyes. No wonder Emily was so nervous. Even behind those thick glasses, her cold stare was still taking some time to getting used to. "Please take a seat, Miss Emerald." Emily then turned around to see a man in a black suit with jet black hair. Miss Legend went on to say, "We just have some paperwork to do, and then we can discuss when you can start working." Emily slowly nodded her head as she took a chair, grabbing a pen from the cup of pens that was placed on Miss Legend's desk. Then she started to read through each and every piece of paperwork. Then she started to fill out the sheets of paper. A few minutes later, she was done. The man in the black suit grabbed the paperwork from her and looked through it. "I'm afraid you won't be coming back. You have done so much damage here already, and honestly, I think the children are a little bit afraid of you. You won't be joining us back at the funniest orphanage ever." Miss Legend then leaned forward and said, "Sorry, Miss Emerald," while she was bouncing up and down in her chair. Emily was so disappointed to notice the weird reaction. She slumped down and breathed out a sigh and said, "Yeah, me too," then walked out of the door and shut the door. Chad said, "Oh, I take it didn't go so well?" Emily was silent as they walked all the way back to the car. They got in the car and Chad said, "Do you want to talk about it?" Emily said, "I just need a moment to think." Emily grabbed her notebook and started flipping through the pages. This notebook she draws ideas for paintings she's going to make in this notebook before she puts it on a canvas as a final product that she then sells to a distributor. Emily reached the end of her notebook. On the very back of the notebook, there was a piece of paper glued to the back of the notebook. It was a white piece of paper with crayons in different colors. It was the first piece of art Emily drew, and it was a drawing of how she wanted her wedding to be when she got older. She drew this when she was 6. She flipped over one page. On that page, there was resting on the back of the notebook was her new design for her wedding, which she and Chad agreed on. Looking at this, she smiled, but when she went to put her notebook back, it was a picture of a little girl with a dark purple background, and the girl was a silhouette. Emily said, "How did this get here?" Chad said, "What's up?" Emily said, "It's a drawing of my little sister. I don't remember putting it in here." In her mind, she went from excitement about the fact that she could have children to thinking about the fact that her sister died because her mom didn't go to the hospital. "I could remember that night in vivid detail. It was midnight. I was 8 years old. I woke up. I was getting up to get a drink of water. My dad was going to be home soon. He worked the night shift as a square object creator. The motto is, anything square, we will create it. Looking back, I see why their company went out of business. But anywho, I remember I could hear my mom crying. I looked down the hallway, and my little sister was asleep. I knew this because she closes her door when she's sleeping. I heard my dad coming in. He dropped his stuff and picked me up and asked, "Why are you still up?" We both got distracted by the sound of something hitting something else in the bathroom. He put me down and went and knocked on the door. My mom said it was okay to come in. I got scared. I didn't know what was going on. And my dad said to go back to bed. But as I listened on the other side of the door, inside I heard my mom saying she had a miscarriage. I didn't know what it meant, but I thought she was dying. They were really sad, but my dad focused on my mom. I later found out that it was twin babies. I didn't know if they were girls or boys. Later, my mom found out that she was going to have a rainbow baby, but my dad felt like he was replacing other children. He really struggled with that, and one day, as he was driving to work, he wasn't paying attention, and his car got pushed off of a bridge. They were pulling his car out of the water, but they didn't find my dad. Ever since then, I have always wondered if he's alive or dead. There was no answer to this question that I could find, but people thought that maybe they saw footprints, but it could have been an animal, and it was very hard to tell because the water was really throwing a fit that day. My mom miscarried the next baby, but we knew she was a girl, and my mom named her Jaden after my dad, Jason. I was pretty upset with her because all the clues in my mind led to the fact that he just left us, and eventually I convinced my mom that that was true. I wish I hadn't. My mom never remarried, and my little sister and I don't talk that much, but we have very different paths that we have taken. Back in the car, Emily put the paper back in her notebook, and Chad said, "You know, that's probably how it got in there. You just forgot to put it away earlier." Emily laughed about this. "Yeah, it's true," she said. On the next page, there was a sketch idea for an old fairground poster for a show they were making based off of a sad story that shut down the park a few years ago. The fairground visited Sparrow Island every 2 years. She loved going. Well, she used to anyway. The last time I went, I was 16, on my first date. It was October 12th, 2021. We met through a friend. The guy's name was Ghost, but he spelled it with a J, though he seemed more eager about dating than I did. At the time, I wished that I was as confident as he was. I know now that that wasn't true. As the night wore on, he kept winning prize after prize and giving it to everyone. At first, I didn't really notice it, but then I started paying attention to who he gave them all to. And he said call me to someone. But I didn't know he did until a friend told me a few months later. Hey, leave a few for me, I said jokingly. He suddenly went serious, saying, don't be so selfish. I was just making a joke. Well, it's not funny, Ghost said, as I suddenly felt bad. I felt like I ruined the entire date. I excused myself to go to the restroom and freshen up, but when I came back, he was flirting with other girls. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront him or run away? I just started crying. I really didn't know what to do. No one I knew had this problem. This is until a girl who had long, straight, silvery red hair with light brown skin and orange eyes, and a black hair clip on the left side of her head with gold lettering that said TBH. She was wearing black jeans with tiny white dots at the knees, a black shirt with a bright pink jacket, and a yellow purse, saying, you don't need that jerk. Emily replied, thanks. She said I had the same problem 2 summers ago. The same guy. Don't worry. Emily said, you dated him? Angela said, yeah, he's such a jerk. If I were here earlier, I would have told you. Would you like to talk about it? To a trusted adult or just want to hang? I said my mom was going to pick me up in 2 hours. So, Angela then splitted the number of tickets she had, which was 60, into 2 and said, alright, so why don't we just enjoy the fair? Then later, you can talk to your mom. I said, I guess. Angela said, so what are we going to do first? Emily and Angela heard him and the girls he was with laughing. Angela then said, let's go, in a calm voice while grabbing her shoulder and turning around to head in the opposite direction. Angela then threw a green water balloon from across the park, and it landed right on him. Emily said, wow, you can really throw. Angela said, I'm on the school basketball team and the baseball team, and I coach football from time to time, and I'm a substitute teacher, and I help build tanks for the army. I said, really, wow, wait, hold on. If you go to school, how are you able to be a substitute teacher? You're just a kid. Angela said, teenager, actually, and I just mean if the teacher steps out, most of the time, I'm able to finish the lesson they're teaching. Now, let's go have some fun. They rode the Ferris wheel and played some carnival games. Later, Angela had to take over for the president, and my mom showed up right on time. They said goodbye, and I went home. I didn't tell my mom about what happened. After all, everyone was quite distracted by the helicopter that was there to pick up Angela, which was not good for her. She continued to stress about it. My mom, Catherine, but everyone just called her Kath, noticed me being a little off and asked me about it. But by this time, I blocked the whole experience out of my head, and I just remembered hanging with Angela that night. My mom was still worried about me, though. Back to Emily in the car. I remember feeling off, but didn't remember why until one night when I was doing my usual drawing and doodling. Several months after, I was drawing bubbles in my notebook that I was going to convert into a painting on a canvas for an upcoming birthday party for one of my mom's friend's kids. She was turning 6, and her mom agreed to pay for my art. The little girl's favorite color was green, so I painted the bubbles in multicolored. After I sketched them in my sketchbook in black and white, I decided to make a bunch of small bubbles around the edge of the canvas and a big green bubble with a reflection of happy birthday sign. I painted the green bubble and then immediately stopped and dropped my brushes. I immediately remembered the green water balloon Angela threw across the park that landed on Ghost. Just as I started drawing the bubbles on my notepad, I started feeling a hint of anxiety that just kept building. Normally, drawing and painting was how I got rid of my stress, but this seemed to build it up more and more. Now I knew why this undertone of stress was in my life. I then looked over at a big mirror that was hanging on my closet door. I was both confused, annoyed, and stressed. Again, about the fact that I had chosen to block out my memory instead of dealing with it properly. I began walking through my room, throwing my pillow around, being careful not to ruin the painting. And my mom came in immediately, recognizing what was going on, and asked, "Emily, what's going on?" I was now sitting in the floor crisscrossed with my pillow. My mom said, "Angela told me what happened." Emily stopped what she was doing and looked up at her mother. "How did Angela know your phone number?" Her mom sat down next to her. "We met at school and exchanged phone numbers," Kath said.
"But I'm homeschooled," she said. "Craft school," her mom said.
"Oh yeah, isn't that guy Ghost who started eating the bus?" I said, "Yeah. I knew that he was a bad influence, but I didn't notice you talking. I'm sorry, honey. I should have said something. How about we do something tonight? Like have a girls' night?" Mom said as she scooted in for a hug. Come on, tell me all about it." I began to explain the events that had happened. A little later, "Wait, what?" my mom said. I said, "What?" My mom said, "He was talking to a girl after going on a date with you? No wonder he hasn't shown up to class since that day. How about we just chill, watch a movie, get some pizza, and listen to Sim Kelly?" I said, "Okay." 2 years later, I was doing some errands for my mom
At the mall, Casilla Blanca.
I was going to pick up some milk later, but first I was looking at some clothes in the clearance section because my mom and I saved money as much as we could, while only splurging on art supplies and my mom's craft supplies for the school, so that we could donate any money that we earned to charity, which we earned by my mom working at the school, me selling a few paintings online, and of course my dad disappeared one day. I'm still mad at him for leaving. Anyways, I was going to spend my 3/4 that I earned from helping a neighbor maintain their yard. Obviously, they didn't just pay me 3/4. I got $15, but I saved the rest of the money for other things, and the 4/4 I used to get a gumball to chew on while playing games in the arcade. I got my gumball and headed to the arcade. I was at the entrance of the arcade when a guy bumped me and said, "Excuse me." He zoomed off into the arcade. I walked inside. I looked around in the general direction of my favorite game. I always did 3 things when I came here. First, I played my favorite game, Sweet Shop on the Road Cookie Racing. And then I would play the basketball game. Then I would play a claw machine game to win my mom a prize, a little stuffed animal for her collection. At the time, somebody was playing my favorite game, so I walked over to the basketball area first. I went to go and start up the game, but somebody was already playing it. I asked when they were done with it if I could take over. But the same guy that bumped into me earlier, whose name was Hank, thought the guy playing the game was talking to him and walked up. The guy gave up the game to me and said with a shudder, I wasn't talking to you, sir." Hank replied, "Oh, sorry." I said, "It's okay, you can play." I thought to myself, these 2 guys are social anxiety ridden. The other guy who gave up the game ran out of the arcade. I started to get nervous about this guy being a troublemaker, but I sat down in one of the seats near the window. As I sat down with my purse in my lap, I started getting nervous again about these guys and what if they were going to steal my stuff. So I sat my purse underneath the seat. I watched the guys grab onto the basketball and throw one into the hoop, or at least try to. But he totally missed, and it went on the other side and hit somebody else. A small and soft voice was heard from the other side. Then a young girl walked around the corner, crushing the basketball, which was only made of foam, and regained its shape after she let go of it. "You ruined my game," she said, as she realized that he was an adult and started walking towards me. The guy left the arcade after saying sorry and putting the ball back, but now I wasn't nervous at all. The little girl came over and sat down in the seat next to me and said, "Great, now I'm out of coins and I can't even play," she said in an annoyed tone. while crossing her arms. I looked over and saw my favorite game was not being played. I then looked over to the little girl who had at least grunted 3 times since I looked over at the game. I then said to her, "You can have one of my quarters. How many do you have?" And I said, "I have 3. The little girl said, "Why do you only have 3? You're an adult. Don't you have lots of money from your job?" I said, "No, I don't have a job." The little girl said, "All adults have jobs." I said, "Well, I don't." The little girl said, "Oh, hey, that's my mom and dad. Also, how do you live in your house if you don't have a job and money?" "Pepper," Eleanor said from the entrance of the arcade in a disappointed tone. Eleanor said sorry to me, but Pepper began talking again, saying, "What do you do like at school? We did career day, and I picked to be a basketball player. So what do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, I always painted and done art since I was little." Pepper said, "Then how about you just sell your art on a website, like my dad and mom do for their restaurant?" I said, "I do have a lot of art." "Okay, Pepper, time to go. Say goodbye to your new friend," Eleanor said. Pepper said as she walked out, "Here's my family card. Call the number and I'll hook you up with everything you need, okay?" With Pepper's parents were 2 little girls. One was like 8 years old and the other maybe 7. Based on the card that her parents, Chang and Eleonora, they owned the restaurant that sold Mexican food. Anyways, I had always wanted to sell my art, or, give it to people somehow. And the business card did look pretty good, so I decided to call. Also, my room was pretty full of art. Anyways, Eleanor picked up the phone and said, "Oh, wow, I can't believe you actually decided to call us. Let me get Pepper. She's the mastermind behind our website. And she's adopted, and one of her previous foster homes was for hackers." Eleonora yelled for Pepper. Eleanor then said, "She's coming. Listen, don't take this the wrong way, but you are a stranger, so I'm going to keep you on the speakerphone." I said, "I understand." Later we met up, and Pepper helped me design my website to sell my art, and then Pepper set up a side shop in her parents' restaurant that sold art. All I had to do was take it over to her. Pepper really looked up to her dad and wanted to be like him, so selling my art brought her so much happiness, and her parents managed the website and the feedback center. The shop quickly sold out, but whether it was Pepper's amazing selling skills or my amazing art skills, I'm not sure. 2 years went by, and both of our families became really close. It turns out that all 3 of the girls were adopted, but then we received a call from Chang. They got abducted on their train ride over to pick up kids that they had been trying to adopt. We went out to search for them, searching for days and days with a cruel end to our search. But on the search, I met this guy who was super kind and nice. His name was Aiden. All the people who were searching were super kind and nice, but he seemed different. We really hit it off at a few other volunteer events. We ran into each other, and he asked me out. Way later, after Chloe and Zoe's abduction, I agreed, but my mind was elsewhere, thinking about the fact that Pepper had not responded to any of my texts since Chloe and Zoe went missing. I went to the doctor and got some tests done, and they found that I had OCD, but my area didn't have a treatment plan. Since then, I had still not heard from Pepper. I was very worried about her, but I figured she was just having a hard time. So I exchanged numbers with Aiden, and we texted back and forth about when we were going on the date. He said he wanted to surprise me with where we were going. So I begged for one clue, and he said to make sure to bring some gloves.
I was confused for a moment, but then realized he had to be talking about my fancy gloves that were in my closet.
I had mentioned before that I hadn't worn them in a while and would really like to go somewhere that required them. And even though I wasn't using it to hint for him to take me to a fancy restaurant, it was nice for him to pay attention. I set my alarm for tomorrow. But during the night, I had a nightmare about the first date I went on. I woke up in the middle of the night and decided to just shake it off and try to go back to sleep, saying to myself, "It's not going to be the same." That day, Pepper showed up and said sorry for not answering your text and thank you for reaching out. I began to explain what's been going on for the past few weeks. Then I told her about my date, and she got excited and was happy for me and helped me set up a hairstyle. But my mom had a strange face, as if she knew something we didn't. Pepper fixed up my hair and then fixed up my hair. Because, let's just say, it's not her talent. It took me 5 tries, but I finally got a perfect bun. Then Pepper thought about putting a little bracelet that was too small for my wrist around my hair tie to make it look like I was wearing a crown under my bun. I changed into something more comfortable because the date was in several hours, as Pepper began talking about my art, and she decided she wanted to start selling it again. I asked if she was ready, and she said yes. I began working on the landscape I was painting. Later, I said, "What do you think about the painting?" Then Pepper pointed her finger over to a spot on the painting and says, "That spot." I said, "Yeah, I don't know what to do about this spot of the painting." Pepper said, "Maybe a green cloud to match the theme." I said, "Yeah, great idea." I put the finishing touches on it, but my OCD began to make me question if going on this date was a good idea.
I then began to notice all the imperfections on my painting.
Pepper realized my OCD hand movement and said this from across the room. "You could go with me to the museum where they treat OCD. It's a nice place. I know you would like it. And some of the employees get to do demonstrations of their talents. The people who work there." I replied that I've been volunteering at the orphanage a lot more, and I'm kind of starting to like it a lot. I've been given an opportunity to teach, and I don't want to miss that. Pepper says, "That's great. You really took the school project far." Pepper calmed her voice and continued by saying, "But you get panicked about messing up. If you go to the TC therapy program, you can have quiet time later in the day when you're not teaching." I replied, "I don't know, but doing demonstrations of my art really seems interesting," I said, trying to look on the bright side, though my brain was running in all different directions. I remember looking over in the corner, imagining what it would look like. "I heard Emily is releasing her painting." A person from the crowd said this as Emily stood behind a big, bright red curtain on a big stage. She pulls off the curtain and reveals her masterpiece in front of the crowd. A bunch of reporters and interviewers, and the person who used to bully her said, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I was so terrible to you, but my eyes had to be clean just to see this painting." Reporters and journalists came up to the stage to interview Emily. She then heard a voice in the crowd saying, "Out of my way, I have to get through." Then she saw a hand push through the crowd. Out came a lady, the president. She takes one look at the painting and passes out. She then gets back up and says, My eyes have never seen such a beautiful sight. If you can paint such a masterpiece, you can do anything, even run a country. I give my presidency to Emily." And the president then says, "Emily, Emily, Emily." A man in a dark suit walks up to the stage and says, "Ma'am, you have just single-handedly cured cancer." Emily looked over to see her friend Pepper standing next to Angela, and she began walking towards her. "My friend, you're alive." And then she's back in her room and says she would take the job. Pepper says, "You had one of your fantasies again, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah." "But I know," she said, "that it's not going to be perfect." The time came for Emily to go on her date. She was very scared, but she got dressed and Pepper had to head home. So she said goodbye to Pepper as they both walked out the door. She drove up to the fancy restaurant and parked her car. She was so excited that this was the place that he told her to go to. But when she got to the door, they said she wasn't on the list and she couldn't see him anywhere, so she went back to her car.
She picks up her backpack
and holds it next to her in the rear view mirror because it has a light, and she uses the light to find where her phone is. Her OCD started, and she said no, no, no. The only way she was able to escape was to have fantasies of the perfect situation. The gown is on her in her fantasy. She is seated in a chair in a fancy restaurant. Then, no wait, ballroom, dancing. Of course, it's literally right around the corner and they don't have free parking. Then Aiden grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the chair, and then they both walked over to the ballroom and began dancing. Then he spun her around, and then I was back in the car to get my phone. I grabbed my phone and got excited again to get out of the car. She looked to the left of the restaurant to see her boyfriend holding a trash bag and wearing heavy-duty boots, rubber gloves, and overalls. She and he were both confused by each other's outfits. He said, "Come on back." I went with him, and he looked at me and said, "That's not really good clothes for collecting trash." I said, "Who said I was collecting trash?" He said, "Yeah, I told you to get your gloves. And did you get any gloves for the volunteers?" "No," I said, "I thought we were going to a fancy restaurant." He says, "Why would we go there? You can't help anyone." So we cleaned up this alleyway on the right, but the back and left still needed to be cleaned. "So at least you'll be here so we can get it done faster." I raised my hands to show off my sparkly fancy gloves.
I said,
"I can't clean anything with these. They are too special." He replies, "Well then, why did you bring them?" I said in an annoyed tone, "I didn't know we were going here." Aiden says, "You know, you're not the girl I thought you were. If all you can think about is yourself, and maybe this isn't going to work out." He then walked off. I said, "Don't leave me here," as I imagined people propelling from the roof. Then I heard the sound of a paint can getting knocked over from the back alley. I yelled in frustration, "Oh yeah, that's certainly going to make sure the alleyway gets cleaned." But 3 figures came from the smoke. 2 of the figures were holding knives, and one of them asked, "Can I help you?" I foolishly mistaken them for the volunteers that were helping clean up, but soon noticed the knives and figured out they're not one of the people. One of the guys was wearing like this green superhero costume. I guess he said, Can I take that purse for you?" Another tried to pull the purse off of my hand, but I pulled it back and swung him off into some trash cans. Then one of them grabbed the purse and started yanking it back and forth. The other one grabbed me and pulled me back. Then, out of nowhere, a random person pushed both of the guys to the side and ran off with my purse. Interestingly enough, it was actually empty. My phone was in my pocket that I had sewn on myself. The guy didn't notice that they ran off with my purse,